thank you very much for coming, and thank you for the organizers to have this opportunity to me to talk about this topic. So actually this lecture will be a little bit more general than the lectures before, so not that concrete and not going into the details, some but overview. Where are we in this topic, and where actually GPUs, which is the topic of this whole conference, is coming to the picture. So I'll start at the very beginning. So what is science about, and what is intelligence about, and what is this big hype around this machine intelligence and big data and data science and all the stuff that you hear a lot, I guess a little bit too much about these things. So actually, as I see, people were always scientists, and actually intelligence and science are very much going hand in hand. So how did we developed through evolution? So people, and actually already animals, observe the world. So we get information about all the things that we have around. Scientists astronomers are interested in stars and moon and planets and so on, but we all are interested about other peoples and things around us just because we want to live and survive. And for this purpose, through our senses, we observe the world, and we create some model, not a mathematical model, but some kind of model inside our head. But if we look closer, we realize that actually our senses, like our eyes or ears, are not universal scientific instruments. So we cannot see atoms, we cannot see even individual cells. And we cannot see galaxies far away, not because they are too small, but they are too faint. So to observe a galaxy, we would need to expand our pupils several meters diameter, which is not a practical thing, and that's why people do not have these big eyes, several meters diameter eyes, just to look at the stars and galaxies, although that may help in reproduction to talk about stars and galaxies. So anyway, so there is some physical constraint that we do not need that, and also there are other senses like radio waves. How good it would be if we wouldn't need to have mobile phones, we could sense radio waves. But actually there are no radio waves in the ether, and it was not necessary to develop such sense. So actually what we see from this thing is that we are not universal scientific instruments. We need some kind of crutches, some kind of processes, or some kind of external tools to empower us to sense things that are not sensible with our born-in instruments. And this can be the telescope, that's the microscope, and we can talk about a lot of scientific instruments, and they expanded what we can observe from the world. So not just the small part of the world that is given for living creatures, but also observe something beyond. The other side, which I'm very proud of, our big brain. So we are the top of the evolution and king of everything, and God gave us the right to rule over the world, and so on and so on. And we are very proud of our big brains. But actually, if you think of that and you take the analogy of the senses, then it is evident that this is, again, the result of evolution. It was designed not for the purpose of doing sciences or programming GPUs, evidently. Okay, it was designed to be able to survive. First of all, it was designed to control our guts, the bacteria itself, like the automatic irrigation system, okay, just some control system or temperature control or whatever, and it's developed, like bureaucracy, and it took over, okay, and became something big, but it is designed not to do math and programming and things like that. And if you just think back when you were a student in the primary school, then actually it takes 6-7 years for a child to learn to add numbers up to 20. So what? Okay, a handful of transistors can do that. And people with their big brain learn 6 years to do that. And after a couple of years, when adding negative numbers and division and more complex stuff, so we lose the large portion of the population, and very few get really appreciate the second order equations or whatever, okay? And this is not the fault of the education system. This is our design goal, to find mates, to run away from predators, find food, and so on and so on. And that's why, as we need crutches for our senses to observe the world, we need crutches for our mind. And actually, the invention of writing, that was one kind of extension of memory. That's one kind of crutch. So I, a professor of Eötvös University, yeah, but I cannot multiply 10-digit numbers in my head, okay? But with pen and paper, I still can. I learned in the school, okay? So it's an external processor, like a GPU or whatever, or external memory. And this actually improved how science was going when math was invented. Actually, it was almost at the same time in physics, so I am from physics and astronomy, when actually telescopes were invented and used by Galilei, for example, and not that much later, Newton invented calculus, differential equations, to model physics. And actually, this was the early times of real science, and now, so we are here in the 21st century, the modern area of science, and the picture is the same. So we observe the world, we try to create models in our head and on chalkboards and math and writing and mathematical models, and try to calculate these models. Like in physics, we have differential equations, how a projectile is moving, or how planets move around the sun. And we can actually solve some of those differential equations. And if you learned in school that actually you learned a very few differential equations in school that can be solved by hand, analytic methods. And there are all the other differential equations, the majority of them, the nonlinear, complex, coupled differential equations, that cannot be solved at all with analytical methods. And for a couple of 100 years, physicists and scientists tried to linearize and try to do some tricks to still solve those equations that cannot be solved at all, okay? And then came computers. In the late 20th century, actually real computers really came in the early 21st century, and now they are everywhere. So they are at the instruments, they control the instruments, they collect the data at CERN, they collect the data at big telescopes, they collect the data everywhere. And actually they collect the data from society, for example. They are most probably listening in some of your phones and sending information to Facebook or whatever, or NSA or whatever company. Okay, so data collection is done through computers, and the processing of the data and the modeling cannot be done. The storage of the data, that's one thing, but also the processing of the data, the modeling cannot be done without computers. The first step was actually to have the same differential equations or whatever models we did have before, and empower them and run them with computers and solve differential equations that cannot be solved by hand. And that was a big plus. And actually we do something similar, like you see the figure below, the Einstein equations and solving them, and embodied simulation. There's Gabor, that's my student, who is doing that actually, to have millions of particles and follow their trajectories and study the large-scale structure of the universe. And then we can do that. And we always run this circle around that connect the results of our simulations with the observation. And we check, is my model is good? And if my model is not good, I change what is the world behaving, or how can I model something. And this is very similar to the previous pictures, the caveman, when he observed his wife, and he has some model, when she is happy or not, and if it turned out that if he brings home something that the wife is not that happy, then he tried to bring something else. So changing the model, okay? So how the world around happening, how the world around, and we adjust this model, and the models became, on one hand, better and better and more perfectly describing reality, and on the other side, of course, because reality is complex, the models get even more complex and complex. Okay, and just a few examples, just some historical notes when all this started. So some of the audience are too young to be born at that time, but in the mid-90s, actually, the state of cosmology and state of astronomy was quite different, and actually going even back. So we sometimes think that, well, the ancient Greeks and Galilei and things like that, but actually it turned out that it was less than 100 years ago when we actually discovered that there are more galaxies in the universe than our Milky Way. Okay? So up to the 30s, 1930s, we didn't know about anything beyond the galaxy, our galaxy. We actually didn't know that it is a galaxy because we cannot see it from the outside. And there was a large debate, a scientific debate, whether the universe is billions times bigger or not, okay? And actually, it took large telescopes, the first 100-inch, 2-meter telescopes, to gather enough light to actually see those galaxies and discover that, hey, the universe is billion times bigger than we thought before, and there are lots of galaxies all around that, and everything is much bigger, and we are actually much smaller. And it took a lot of time to improve the telescopes, and not just the telescopes, but also the sensors to gather more light. So even if you have a big telescope, and you look into with your eyes, you are limited with your device, with your eyes. And first, photometric plates was a big plus because they could collect light for hours and they integrate the light. And actually in the mid-90s, the first CCD chips, which are all in our mobile phones, they came into life. Actually, it was you see at the middle picture, it was a 120 megapixel camera, which is now not that big because I think you can almost buy a mobile phone with such camera, but actually at that time, half of the pixels of the whole world was in that single camera, okay? So that was almost all the pixels in the world. And because sky is very, very dim, it took a couple of years to collect that huge amount of data, which is actually not that huge amount, 10 terabytes. This is nothing. You can buy almost a pen drive or whatever with that capacity. But at that time, when CD disks were around, it was big. And there started some exponential process. So in the 1930s, there was only one galaxy we know about. In the late 80s, there was 1,000, and all of a sudden there was 1 million galaxies with distances, with redshifts, and 300 millions with pictures. Okay, and all of a sudden it turned out that it cannot fit into our mind. So in the late 20th century, scientists or astronomers went to the telescope, they observed with their eyes, they made some drawing, and they thought about all the galaxies they know about, okay? But when you have 300 million, you cannot give it even to a PhD student that, hey, please look through all these galaxies, because you can calculate that the PhD time and his whole life is not enough just to look each of those galaxies. So we definitely need new methods, new approaches. And actually that was one of the first big data projects when most of the man-years or FTs or whatever, or the work went it was an astronomical project, astronomy project, not computer science or whatever, but most of the money went to computers and programming to handle that amount of data. And it was evident that we cannot go with the old way. And of course, it is not stopped. So we hope, at least, I always need to modify the date when LSST will start. This is the next big telescope that will do similar jobs, but much faster. Hopefully next year it will really start, so it will be a little bit bigger mirror, not 2 meters, but 8 meters. It will have not 100 megapixels, but 3 billion pixels, and actually it is more sensitive, and it will do the same survey that took for the previous survey, SDSS, 5 years. It can do that in 2 days, okay? So that's an exponential growth in data collection. And I was very proud of this, astronomy, huge amount of data, and so on, but it turned out that it is nothing, okay? So when I first started to work with doctors and biologists, it turned out that gene sequencing is going even faster pace. So actually, this figure here, you see the mouse, yeah? So this is a plot. Below the horizontal axis is years, up to 2015 or almost now, I think. And this is the price of genome sequencing, okay? How much it takes to sequence a human genome. The white line, that's the so-called Moore's law. How computers getting cheaper and cheaper. You all experience that computers, at least the capacity, the same capacity, getting cheaper and cheaper with an exponential pace. So this is the vertical axis is logarithmic. So it's exponentially decreasing the price of the same power. And the curve with the points is the price of gene sequencing, which means that the already exponentially growing potential of computational hardware is very, very slow compared to the pace how people can sequence genomes. So the first genome was sequenced in early 2000. It took 15 years and $3 billion, okay, to sequence one single genome. And now it's below, I think it's around $500. And it takes a couple of days, and you can order it. You send your sample to China and get back the results in 2 weeks, okay? So that's really crazy. So actually they can sequence faster the genomes that they can produce disks and computers, okay? So it is so again, I cannot emphasize it. So this is a logarithmic scale, and that on that logarithmic scale, there is this big jump, okay? So it's just crazy, okay? And it transforms biology. It transforms everything we know about biology, and I'm actually very optimistic that now we have hope, or we have a chance to understand something that was absolutely hopeless. So absolutely hopeless to understand aging and cancer and all those things, because we had no telescopes, okay? So without telescopes, we cannot imagine that there are lots of galaxies, or we can, of course, we can imagine UFOs or whatever, but there is no evidence, okay? So now we have telescopes, and we have telescopes for ourselves and for our genome. It transforms everything. But there comes the problem, and then I try to get to machine learning actually, that remember, so we have this small device, a couple of cubic centimeters, with that relatively small capacity of couple of bit size buffers and things like that, short-term memory, couple of bits, and very slow, okay, and cannot handle really complex stuff. Actually, we can recognize faces and things like that, but hey, how can we handle 2 terapixel images billions, 1,000 times of billions of nucleotides in the genome, or this is the complex network of the Bitcoin transaction system, okay? Or this is, we have just started to work on pathology images, and it turned out that a single slide, okay, a single microscope slide that they scan, it's a 1/4 of terapixel, okay? And they can make such slides, I think, more than 1,000 a day, okay? And for the Sloan Digital Sky Survey, it took several years to collect those huge few terapixel image, okay? And this is just a small piece of your body, and it's scanned. And there are thousands and billions of people, and it would be better to scan all this stuff. So there's the key problem, the sheer size of the data, and on the other side, the complexity of the system. So it will be not just equations like you print on your t-shirt. Physicists know what I am talking about, Maxwell equations or Einstein equation, which is a couple of letters. Biology is not like that. And actually complex reality is not like that. So we need to actually transform how we handle all this stuff. Well, we have computers, but our old thinking that we have the data, we have some models, we write some clever mathematical equation, and we feed the parameters and things like that, it is not working. So actually the main paradigm in machine learning is that you have just the data and let the computer do everything else. Find out the models and have prediction by itself. So that's the promise, and it in some way works like a magic black box. So I put there some notes that why now? Actually, when I did my master's in the late 80s, it was way back, I already researched artificial neural networks. Actually, there was a wave of machine learning and artificial neural networks at that time. There was only a couple of problems. There were no real computers, okay? And there were no data. Otherwise, most of the models were there. So most of the models that we use now in this modern machine learning, deep learning, whatever, they were invented in the late 80s, early 90s. And they on some low level, they kept working, but the improvement was not much on the models there, but on the other side, on the amount of data, which is important, but actually it turned out that it is not the key factor, but the real key factor is computational power. And I here would like to thank for all the people who like to kill zombies, okay, on their computers, because they made possible to have science this big leap. So that made possible, that financed, yeah, that financed all the production of computers, that made possible GPUs, for which we are here and which we use for machine learning to analyze pathology images or the sky and all stuff like that. So we have a couple of projects, but I am running out of the time, so I just quickly mentioned that. So machine learning is used for driving cars, and you know all these recognizing cats and dogs on Facebook images or whatever, but actually they can be used for serious purposes also. And we, at our group at Utrecht University, we use that, for example, to predict antibiotic resistance from the sequence of bacterial genomes, which is a big threat, by the way, for humanity, that we run out all the antibiotics and we need to do something. Use these small sensors, smartwatches and so like that to diagnose in early phase Parkinson's disease, calculate from the chemical composition of molecules whether it will be toxic or not, just based on the type of atoms it's based on, or chemical equation of it. Analyze X-ray images to detect early time breast cancer and other things. We use it for cosmology, of course, because we love that, and analyze pathology images. And one of our key projects is to do something that is called explainable AI, which is not just using AI for doing these machine learning type of things and predict things, but also for explain how it works and get some knowledge out of that may make us think about better things. So the basic idea, and I have lots of slides, but I will just skip. So the basic idea of machine learning is same as learning in people, that you show examples and people, the child or the machine, try to categorize these stuffs, and actually behind there is some representation of all this stuff. All those pixels are represented in your brain with some clever way, we do not know how actually brain represents it, but we can think of a large dimensional vector space or whatever, and we try to categorize things, or we try to invent some functions that if we have input this picture or that picture, what is the output word, what is the name of that picture. So that's in some sense a function, and it can be actually represented as an artificial neuron, which is just because we know that our brains has neurons, but actually it's just a mathematical model and it's just an analogy and actually nothing to do with real neurons. And after it turns into a mathematical optimization problem that these neurons has lots of parameters, it's actually a fitting of function, but a way more complicated function than linear, and you optimize those parameters. But of course, if you have, and I just skip this, if you have a huge network, it can have, for example, 2 million parameters, okay? Not just 2 like in a linear fitting, but 2 million. And actually there are lots of tricks how to do that fitting. You learned in school how to fit a linear, and it's quite complicated in itself, and you can make a lot of mistakes. And if you have millions of parameters and often less number of data points than number of parameters, actually it's a mathematical nonsense, but actually it can be done through regularization and with clever tricks. And actually we learned a lot in the couple of last decades how to do this. And just one concrete example that we are doing, and I just picked this because last year we have a talk about how to do direct n-body simulation with GPUs. So following millions of particles and solving the Newton's equations for millions of particles, actually we can simulate a patch of the universe, the distribution of matter, or actually dark matter. We can shine light through this, and as you know, gravity bends light. You can calculate the so-called gravitational lensing field, then you will have such picture that astronomers actually can measure by measuring the bending of light on the sky. But the tricky question is, so this is the simulation, okay? The tricky question is how to invert this, because you not start with the cosmological parameters, that the Big Bang, but you know this picture and you want to infer back. So it's a hard inverse problem, and hard inverse problems are usually not easy to handle by math, and that's a problem. And what the clever neural network can do, and actually I think it's very, very surprising that it works, that it can invert this complex nonlinear process, and in some way from this picture that we observe, it can infer the cosmological parameters. And actually the surprising thing is that it works better than other methods. So cosmologists used Fourier spectrum, power spectrum, and things like that they learned in school, analytical methods, how to get the information from those pictures and infer back for cosmological parameters. But actually neural network invents another method, okay? And as I said, we are after explainable AI, so we dig deep into the internal structure of the neural networks, and we see that there are some tricky kernels that the neural network learns, and it turns out that it does not learn power spectrum, rather it focuses on these so-called halos, patches of dark matter, and the shape, the profile of these halos are more informative on cosmological parameters. So actually this is something that this neural network method not just solved the problem better than cosmologists try to solve for decades, but actually it gives new hints and teaches something for some new tricks, which is, I think it's really nice, and I hope at least that scientists will not go out of job market, and with the help of neural networks, we can do better. And I will finish in 2 slides. And we can do the same trick. And again, I just discussed with Gergely that it is a really good time for sciences, that it gets back to the original idea that we want to know everything. Okay, and I was educated as a physicist and did astronomy for a lot of time, but at the same time, we can analyze X-ray images of breasts, okay, and look for cancer, because we have the same tools. It was always almost true that you can use the equations, but now this unification is even better or even nicer. So with the same tools, with the same powerful tools, with your skills, with programming and analyzing data, you can do both things at the same time. Actually, I have students who are doing cosmology in one day and breast cancer or pathology image processing on the other day. So I think this is the message that you all know, of course, that we cannot do this without computers. And I am very hopeful that the future is bright and we can actually reach things that were just dreams for thousands of years. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, so any questions?
Hello. I'm very intrigued by your ideas about understandable, explainable AI. I've seen the picture of variational autoencoder. Is there something else also which you consider in this direction?
Yeah, so actually there are a lot of movement in this line that how to understand what AI is doing, and actually it is interesting and important for the points of science, and also when we talk to doctors. Actually, it is way more important even than that can we trust on these machines? So actually think of just self-driving cars or whatever. If you do not understand, then how can you trust? Actually, this is a tricky philosophical question because actually we do not understand people. We just think that other people think like us, and you can understand that. So actually, there are a lot of techniques that are developing. One is this autoencoder networks, and other is that we done here just to have larger kernels than people usually do in deep neural networks. They usually do some just 3x3 kernels, and you cannot really get much information on that. But with some deterioration of performance, you can use larger kernels and look at kernels. And also, since this whole stuff is backpropagation, propagates information backwards, and you can use this so-called layer-wise relevance propagation, which is like propagating error back. You can propagate better information. So when it decides whether there is something or there is not cancer or whatever, then you can propagate backwards this information back to the picture. And it can highlight part of the pictures. And actually, here we do something similar. And surprise or not, actually, neural network looks at the same features that doctors already look at pictures when they are seeing mammograms. So I think there are promising things, and I think we are stepped over the old mantra that they are just black boxes and we do not know how they work. So and I think this is one of the most exciting area in machine learning right now.
Okay, any more questions? Then let's thank István again.